Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the worst legendary lord of every single race in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, at least as things currently stand in the game, though obviously this will change with new patches. We're going to get 3.1 soon enough, but at the moment, starting with the Beastmen, and for the Beastmen we have Khazrak One-Eye. Though I would say that outside of Taurox, there's not necessarily such a huge gap between the Beastmen legendary lords. Like, yes, Taurox is substantially better than anyone else, but when you're looking at Mogr, when you're looking at Malagor, when you're looking at Khazrak, they all work in different ways, but all of their campaigns, in terms of difficulty, in terms of how they play out, they're not too far from each other. But I would certainly say Khazrak has the most difficult campaign of all of them, in that his turn 1 situation is probably the hardest in the game. You can take the forest over here, but you're going to have to fight this army over here. You can ambush it, sure. It is something you're going to be able to ambush, but then you also have to take the forest here, and you're not going to be able to bring the hero here for whatever reason. This is one of the campaigns that could really use a better start. But then looking at his faction effects, he does get an ambush success chance of 15% for all his armies, evasion chance of 15%, and a dread cost of minus 15% for all unit capacity upgrades. That is pretty solid. And then Khazrak himself, in terms of his lord effects, he's getting Vanguard deployments for Bestigors, Razor Gores, and Poison Attack for all Ungor units. So he's all about buffing the Ungors, specifically the Ungor Raiders with Poison Attacks. That is useful. Benefits, more benefits during ambushes, reinforcement range, chance of intercepting, melee attack benefits for Ungor Gore and Bestigor units, cast Warhounds, Razor Gores, and Harpy units, magic item drop chance, and then causes fear and terror when fighting against the Empire. Well, terror is only against the Empire, fear is against humans, so I'm guessing Bretonnia as well. Then he gets a minus 33% vigor loss reduction, Strider, and then a choice between Rune of the True Beast, which gives missile resistance to his entire army. You really want to go for that, or 10% weapon strength for his entire army. Now, the problem with Khazrak is that the units he's buffing are not really the units you want to use in a long campaign as Beastman. He gets a bunch of those benefits that might be useful in the early game, but keep in mind he's only going to be able to use them once he gets to the prerequisite rank. So he's only going to be able to get all of these benefits once he's ranked 12. And by that point, you might be recruiting other units in your army as opposed to Bestigors, Ungors, all that kind of stuff. And on top of that, a lot of the factions that surround him, as you might imagine, hate him. He starts a war with the Wood Elves, he starts a war with Middenheim, he starts a war with Karl Franz. You're the only faction that AI Karl Franz starts a war with. So he is going to attack you. And that, as you might imagine, is going to create a lot of headaches in your campaign. You can deal with it and farm him for Marks of Ruination to get these rights unlocked, to get army capacity, etc. But it is obviously going to be something of an issue to deal with the constant attacks from Karl Franz and then Liechtenstein or Middenheim. The only allies you may have in this entire campaign are the Warriors of Chaos. And maybe the Norscans if they do decide to come over here. But really, it's just you and Festus that you're going to work together against the Empire. Now, Festus can beat the Empire on his own. You also can, but it's certainly a far more difficult journey. You do have an advantage in that you start in a heavily forested area, where you can really make use of the heavy ambush success chance that you do have, but it's still going to be a complicated start. Now, if you do manage to survive the initial situation, you basically dominate all the other factions around you, with the exception of Festus, and sweep the entire Empire, because the Empire is pretty pathetic and they're fairly easy. But just keep in mind, if you took Khazrak and put him in a different starting position against different factions that are actually a lot better than the Empire, or if the Empire is remade, yeah, he would struggle significantly in his campaign. It's not like his campaign is easy at the moment, but it can become so much worse if the Empire is remade and actually made to be a good race. Because right now, he's dealing with one of the worst races in the game, and you can certainly struggle quite a bit in his campaign. But if you manage all of that, if you get steamrolling, if you start unlocking the good units, yes, you do have quite a bit of potential in this campaign. But right now, Khazrak is the worst legendary lord of the Beastmen. Moving on to Bretonnia, we get Alberic the Bordelot. To be honest, I would have personally put Lewin Leoncourt because his campaign start is pretty awful. Yes, he's a good Legendary Lord, but you are defined by your starting position. And Lewin certainly has a really bad starting position. But people voted for Alberic. No, they overwhelmingly voted for Alberic. Let me explain why that is, however. He gets a recruit rank and a recruitment duration for Bretonnian Knight units. That's all well and good and certainly not bad at all. And then he gets income from ports plus 50%. Now, here's the thing about that income from ports. While it's certainly going to generate a good amount of money for you, relying on ports for income is not necessarily the wisest move. To be clear, Bretonnia has a really good economy. Besides that, you don't really need the major economic benefit if you're playing a Bretonnian faction because your baseline economy is just going to generate a lot more. Though it certainly makes port regions far more useful. I mean, consider this, like the baseline farms, right? The baseline farms, the fields generate 300 income. Even if you get the tier 3 port, and keep in mind, ports are generally expensive as structures. Even if you're getting a tier 3 port, yes, that's going to generate more income, but even so. And besides, most ports are probably going to end up limited to tier 3. So yeah, 450 income, 150 income benefit for most of the ports that you'll get in the game. And going all the way to tier 5, which does take a while, you're looking at the 250 income benefit. Bretonnia doesn't lack for money. Bretonnia is limited by the peasant economy, and it's also limited by the vows. Now, looking at Alberic's Lord effects and special skill line, he gets a melee defense benefit for peasant mobs, men-at-arms, spearmen-at-arms, and knights of the realm, all of which are useless units. No joke. You don't want to buff to get Knights of the Realm because due to the nature of battles in the game, the fact that you have a lot of settlement battles, and specifically a lot of siege battles, what you want to do if you're playing Bretonnia is you want to get questing knights. Now, he does have an advantage in that he does start with the tier 3 settlement, so he can get the royal stables and start recruiting questing knights pretty quickly in his campaign. And that is certainly an advantage for him to deal with. Though it is a bit annoying that he starts with a port, so that means you're not going to be able to get the tier 2 farm very quickly because you require the windmill in order to do so. So that is a bit of a shame when you're dealing with it. However, you do have the ability of getting trebuchets pretty quickly. Yes, there are certainly significant advantages. And also the fact, because you're starting with the tier 3 settlement, you're going to get 60 growth just because of that tier 3 settlement. So Alberic does have some advantages. Really, that settlement in itself is one of the only advantages he has in his entire campaign that really matters. He does get the construction cost for minus 40% for ports, and the construction time for ports, so that's okay, and that's reducing the significant construction cost for ports. Construction cost for resource production buildings, construction time for resource producing buildings, and tradable resources produced 10%. And then he gets Peasant Duty, commandment that gives 5 control, 3% income, and 10 growth. This is pretty good, pretty solid. And then 20% physical resistance. Alright, but here's the problem. Now, Alberic only starts with a Knight's Vow. And you kind of want to get, obviously, the questing vow very, very quickly. Why he doesn't have the Grail vow from the beginning, that's a really good question. He is a duke. He should already be a Grail Knight, just to be very clear. This is how pathetic Alberic is. He should have all of this already unlocked, but only Lewin actually has all of this. Rapunzel is better, and I don't understand how Rapunzel has already the questing vow unlocked, and she can start working on the Grail vow, whereas Alberic, who already should be a Grail Knight, that's what he should be in the lore based on what I know of Bretonnia, certainly a questing knight already having completed his questing vow, he instead has to deal with this. Now, it isn't a problem, you just get pledged to campaign and you fight the siege over here, but it's still an annoying thing to deal with during the course of your campaign. What's annoying about it is that it means you're going to have to, until you get that, getting questing knights is going to be a bit of an issue because the upkeep on questing knights is annoying to deal with. When we're thinking about this quest, what's really, really, really frustrating about this quest situation is that he starts in Lustra. Nothing wrong with that, but in order to do that quest, he needs to take Sartosa. Now, having to traverse this kind of distance just for an item is absolutely not worth it. You can do it eventually, but it means he's going to be doing much of his campaign without his weapon. And that is pretty awful. It's not like it's an amazing weapon either way. The benefit, I guess, the control benefit is okay, but the set bonus of melee attack when fighting at sea, yeah, that's not really worth it in any way, shape, or form. You're well off to just go over here, take the Piranha Swamps. The starting position itself is one of the few things. As a Lord, Alberic has always been kind of pathetic as a Lord. His starting position is much better now. He can get quite a few things done. He can ally Marcus, he can ally the Lizardmen. I probably would say that the easier thing to do would be to wipe out Marcus and ally the Lizardmen, because having to fight Lizardmen with Bretonnians is not necessarily the wisest move in the world. So you can take out the Lizardmen over here, and then switch around to deal with Lufar Harkon, ally Gorok, and then go deal with Marcus Wolfhard, who's going to have other issues in his campaign. But Alberic just isn't that special. He's kind of like a discount Lewin Leoncoeur, and Lewin is far better in a battle. That's kind of the thing. Like Lewin has much better effects. Much better Lord effects. Campaign benefits, sure. You could argue that Alberic gets a better situation than Lewin, to be clear, and he does have a much better starting position. So I probably recommend playing his campaign more than I recommend Lewin, but Lewin is just a better Lord with it, because he starts with all the vows unlocked from the start of his campaign. Finally, let me just point this out, that if you're playing Alberic, you have the annoying bloody diplomacy limitations where you can't confederate other Bretonnian factions until you complete everything here in the Chivalry Code. And that is pretty annoying. Rapance has a Crusader tree line. Maybe Alberic could get that as well. Like, it feels like they moved his starting position, but they should have adapted his tech tree as well, in the similar way that Rapance had her tech tree adapted due to her starting position. Getting to the Chaos Dwarves, well, it's either Astragoth or Zaytan. Drazov is just the best flat out of all the Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lords, so that leaves Astragoth or Zaytan as being the worst. Now, here's what I would say with respect to that. While certainly Zaytan has a much worse starting position than Astragoth, because he's starting with these two settlements, he doesn't have a tier 2 capital, and he's marching east while he has the Grimgor tied to the west. Yes, Grimgor is a force in nature in itself. While all of that is a problem in Zaytan's campaign, Zaytan is a much better Legendary Lord. He gets so much casualty replenishment through his items and Lord effects that is absurd. He gets so much labor that you'll be swimming in labor in your campaign. Sure, you won't be raiding cafe and caravans if you're playing Zaytan because of his starting position, but the amount of labor you're getting will give you such a significant economic benefit that it doesn't really matter in this campaign. Well, it does. It's not the same early game advantage that Drazov has, but still, you will do very well with Zaytan in the long term. Whereas Astragoth, yes, he's better in the early game, but he's actually worse than either Drazov or Zaytan in the late game. The reason is, while Astragoth certainly is cool, don't get me wrong on the exosuit aspect, and he does have powerful abilities and items, his faction effects and lord skill does leave a lot to be desired. He gets to control in all provinces. Now, some people would argue control is an important thing. It is not for the Chaos Dwarves. I have never seen a rebellion playing as the Chaos Dwarves once in my campaign, or if I've seen it, it was just because I took a province with a high level of, say, Skaven corruption. Because of that, the rebellion sparked at the same time my army was still there. Usually rebellions are not a thing because it's easy to keep in control, especially if you have a significant amount of labor. 10% conclave influence doesn't mean much. Compare this to the labor benefit of Zaytan. Zaytan wins because he's going to be able to use the labor he's getting to get sacrifices Arnagrund, which is a lot more labor than you're going to get here. You would basically need to overcome that. Like, for every 10 influence, you're gaining 1 extra, so you're looking at 11. The research rate also isn't really an important thing, because a lot of the Chaos Dwarf research is locked off by resources and generally is pretty quick to do. So it's not really a significant benefit. Then when we're looking at his Lord effects, yes, he gets a lot of benefits for Bone Centaurs, and I'd certainly not laugh at that, but Astragoth is better to confederate than he is to actually play. He's also better to confederate because he's not going to die off like, say, Drazov or Zaytan might. Because Zaytan might be wiped out by Grimgor, Drazov might be wiped out by the Dark Alliance alliance like Emmerich, Gorst, Tretch, and Greases potentially. Whereas Astragoth probably is the guy who's going to do the best when controlled by the AI, which actually is not necessarily a point in his favor for playing him because, yeah, it's better to just confederate him through the Tower of Zar. Because if you're playing another Chaos Dwarf campaign, you'll be able to reach that confederation point faster. The reason Drazov will reach it faster is because he's going to get all those juicy caravans near the Black Fortress, so that's a lot of labor, that's a lot of influence. The reason Zaytan's going to reach it faster is he flat out gets more labor than either of those two, and he's just going to get a lot of influence as a result of that. Now, looking at the special skill line, you get diplomatic relations with the demonic factions, which is okay as a benefit, absolutely, but it's not really too big of an issue in your campaign. Then we get further benefits for Bull Centaurs, Armor Piercing, Upkeep, Armament Cost. We get a bounce spell of Burning Wrath. I'm not too fond of this ability. Let me explain why this is. Burning Wrath as an ability, like when you look at Burning Wrath as an ability, it's already a pretty fast casting ability, and it's not necessarily too big of an issue to just keep casting this a lot. And just having 3 of these, it's not really going to matter as much as you might think. And one of the issues Astragoth has is because he doesn't have a flying mount, actually getting these off can be a bit of an issue. The one thing he does have that is very substantial and really powerful is Hero and Lord Recruit rank in all provinces and Hero Capacity +2. And then he gets the Hellhammer Winds of Magic cost. Hellhammer is a pretty solid spell. It's no Flames of Asgore, but it's still a pretty solid spell that you can use. That costs 16, and then when you're looking at Dark Sacrifice, you're looking to reduce it to 10. It's not the same as Drazov, who gets Flames of Asgore, which is one of the most powerful spells in the game, and 9 Winds of Magic. Then he has 2 items, but he has no set bonus. So the items are good, make no mistake on that, but not having a set bonus certainly diminishes him, I feel. So Astragoth, like all the Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lords are pretty solid, but if there was a campaign I wouldn't play, and I've played Astragoth's campaign, but if there's a campaign I would not necessarily recommend, it is probably Astragoth Iron Hand. Like, it could, the way I see him is he's the starter lord for the Chaos Dwarves. Every race has like a generic lord that's all about learning to play that race, and that's kind of the role Astragoth has. But it's like, if you're a more experienced player in Total War, you'll do much better in Drazov or Zaytan's campaign, even though Zaytan is a lot more difficult to deal with. That's not to say Astragoth has an easy time, because he's also close enough to Grimgor, and the way you expand naturally will put you in conflict with Grimgor, which is always a fun experience. Like, by turn 10, Grimgor had 3 armies, was, not full was, he had just recently declared one, but he had like 2 full stacks, a third working there, he had was, and he was ranked 10. And I defeated Abadam, that was a brutal slog. So Astragoth is not exactly gonna just roll over his enemies. Unless you decide to ignore the Darklands, which is not a great idea as a Chaos Dwarf, and instead head north. You can do so. There's some good provinces over here for you to take, like the Skull Road, the Goramandi Mountains. You can do so and establish a massive empire and deal with Grimgor later. Just bear in mind, the more time you delay as Astragoth, the more time Drazov has to get wiped out. Now, of course, if you're playing as Zaytan, you're just not going to be able to help Drazov at all, so he's going to be on his own. So you gotta balance it out. Though I'd say from a more long-term perspective, Zaytan is better. From a short perspective, Astragoth is the better choice. Moving on to demons, we have Kugath, Plaguefather of Nurgle. Sure, I could have put Daniel on this list, but Daniel is such a non-entity as I see it that he doesn't even deserve a spot on this list. But yes, he is the worst Legendary Lord in the game by far. But then we have Kugath. Poor Kugath. You gotta be impressed by Nurgle, because the Dragon Isles are an amazing province for regions, very easy to defend, a lot of ports, so you have quite a lot of potential in this particular province. And then Kugath takes it over and doesn't do anything with it. It is really a sad state of affairs when you look at this situation. It is genuinely a really sad state of affairs with this particular province, and Kugath in general. The problem with Kugath, beyond the obvious being Helm and Gorst having a much better army that directly counters your, oh, you've got plagues, vampire counts don't care. Oh, you have an army that's slow and regenerates HP in combat, and the whole idea is that they're very durable. Doesn't matter, Gorst has a even better one. It is a pretty sad state of affairs. But even beyond that, all that he gets in terms of recruitment costs and recruitment is a benefit in terms of recruitment costs for Nurglings, which are already a very cheap unit, and then recruitment health for Nurgling units, and 10 growth. Oh great, let's give Nurgle growth. I'm sure Nurgle needs growth. You know, one of the factions that has a really good amount of growth absolutely needs even more growth. Actually, one of the factions that doesn't even necessarily care too much about it needs growth. Okay, this is absolutely silly when you're looking at the faction effects. Now, Kugath himself is an amazing lord in a lot of ways, because you look at Kugath himself, he gets an infection cost, Nurgle corruption, chance of plague spreading, he gets growth per region +5 after winning a battle in all provinces. He gets their Nurgling Tide, he gets the Plague Shield, he gets Champions of Decay, Rotting Ways. He has a very, very long skill line that gives him a lot of power. He's also an incredible duelist. He gives regeneration for Nurglings. The problem is they're still Nurglings. Regardless of what you do, they're still going to be absolute ass. So it does have quite a few things on offer over here. And in Skirmish, he is flat out the best duelist in the game. He'll defeat everyone else. The problem is that Nurglings do not make a campaign. Yes, you could get you could get Marauders of Nurgle, of course, in your campaign. You could recruit those. You could recruit Warriors of Chaos of Nurgle, and then Chosen of Nurgle, which are really good units, but they're really expensive. Another problem that Nurgle has is that their structures are very, very expensive, like 10,000 for an advanced military building, 5,000 or 2,000, like let's say infrastructure 2,000 for a basic infrastructure building, 5,000 for any kind of basic unit recruitment. That is a huge amount. The reason they're so expensive is because of the cycle that they have. So they're going to start weak, and then they're going to get strong, and then get weak again. Now, this system flat out doesn't work very well in a campaign, because having to spend that kind of money early on is absolutely ridiculous. And this means also that your economy is unreliable as well. You do have some ways of getting more money in your campaign, because there is a plague that gives you 150 favor when a plague is spread. So you're supposed to be playing around and spreading the plagues in your campaign. That's how this campaign is supposed to be played. There's also, if we look at some of the research benefits, I'm just trying to find it, but you can also get a lot of money for sacking settlements. But again, the issue is you're just going to have to spend a lot of money up front for something that that isn't going to be good, whereas other factions will get them much, much more cheaply. So you're going to have a lot of issues with your economy, you're going to have a lot of issues massing a lot of armies, and your starting position, while the Dragon Isles are a great situation, even if you deal with Gorst, and that's a big if, a lot of people actually do struggle with that for obvious reasons, but even if you do defeat Gorst, and he's going to throw two free armies against you, here's what's going to happen. You're going to find yourself sandwiched between Pig Barter, Greases, and Grand Cafe to the east, and while Greases may not be able to defeat you, Xiao Ming absolutely can, and Xiao Ming is one of those factions that can throw a lot of armies at the problem. So this starting position, like rather the Noblar country, even if you take it, even if you defeat Gorst, you're still going to end up having a lot of problems to deal with in this campaign from the very start. And that's why poor Kugath is the worst. Now, I would have been tempted to put Kairos on this list to a certain extent, but yeah, there's a reason why Kugath is one of the least played legendary lords alongside Daniel in the game at the moment. As for the Dark Elves, it is Rakarth. Now, I did a poll on this subject, and Hellebron won with over 70% of the votes. So this is going to be a controversial take, but I think it is ridiculous beyond measure to consider Hellebron as weaker than Rakarth. Now, I don't think Rakarth is necessarily a horrible legendary lord in the game, but I certainly think he's worse than Hellebron. Hellebron has a great starting situation, a great economy because of that, plenty of good benefits in her campaign. I mean, she's not as good as Morathi, to be clear, but she at least gets a control benefit and other benefits in her campaign. Rakarth's faction benefits are pretty weak. Yes, he gets the ability of gaining monsters in the campaign. The problem with that is while monsters can be effective, they are really expensive. So you're not going to be able to maintain them early on in a campaign. Your raiding stance does not inflict a vigor penalty. That's great. But beyond that, you really don't have a lot going for yourself. Like 10% upkeep for all monster units. If it was 25%, maybe I would have a different perspective. See, having a control benefit in your campaign, as Hellebron does, compared to this, yeah, that's a lot better. And besides, Hellebron also has other benefits as well. He does get the recruitment duration for all monster units, minimum of 1, melee defense, whiplash, Beast Lord's Gaze. But here's the thing, the Beast army of the Dark Elves is currently not necessarily weak, but the least effective army of the Dark Elves. That's because while it's certainly great to be able to use it, and hey, having casualty replenishment in foreign territory is great, though that's not really too much of an issue for the Dark Elves, believe it or not, because here's the thing. You get the 10% campaign movement range penalty, but you can enable channeling stance that enables that replenishment, so it's not really as big of a benefit as you might think. I mean, you do get 5% extra, sure, but Dark Elves have pretty good casualty replenishment by default, so not necessarily the night and day difference. Zaytan, who has 25% casualty replenishment, that's a different discussion, absolutely. But when you're looking at all of these benefits that he has for his special skill line, it just really isn't a great benefit. Yes, you do get that 25% casualties post-battle, so that means you get more slaves. That's probably the biggest thing, by the way, of his entire Lord skill. And you get various other monster benefits. But monsters are not really the units that matter. The reason I say that is they're too expensive to maintain in large numbers. And you want to maintain a lot of large armies. So that means Black Ark Corsairs, Dark Shards, Black Arks, etc. Relying on monsters is a bad idea because you just won't be able to afford entire stacks of them. And you do want to unleash as many armies as possible that can take as much territory as possible. So Rakarth's playstyle, it makes sense within the context of something like Warhammer 2, where armies were more limited, supply lines were far bigger. But supply lines aren't as big of an issue. In Warhammer 3, it's all about getting as many armies as cheaply as possible and that are still effective. And now, Black Ark Corsairs are certainly not the cheapest units that the Dark Elves can recruit, but consider this. A Black Ark Corsair is 160 free upkeep. A monster, a Harpy, a freaking Harpy is 150, and a Harpy is a bloody useless unit. A Manticore, a Carbidus, a War Hydra, they're far, far more expensive. Like looking at the monster pens that you do have over here, like you're looking at 300, you're looking at 300, you're looking at 400, and that's with the benefits. And some of the units that are cheaper are not really units worth recruiting. So I stand by my argument. It isn't worth to have a monster-focused campaign with Rakarth. Another thing that Rakarth has going against him is victory conditions. Now, short campaign victory conditions, alright, that's not too big of an issue. Long campaign victory conditions, you need to go all the way to Ulthuan. And getting from here to here is a long-ass journey. And having to make that long-ass journey does limit your campaign. As opposed to Hellebron, who is here, and she's spawning AI controlled, to be fair, but still, she's spawning armies to invade Ulthuan with. Or that are going to do damage in Ulthuan. While I certainly understand that people are annoyed with the way the slime mechanics are, and they do hate a campaign that's more reliant on getting more slaves than other campaigns are, I am sorry, but I do find it a bit silly to agree with that poll. And I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of flack for that one. Though I would note that most of the time when it comes to the things I'm saying with these videos, sometimes I do disagree with the community when they think they're wrong. And I think that generally speaking, when it comes to the Dark Elves, like my perspective of the Dark Elves is completely different than what most people think of the Dark Elves. Because a lot of people do heavily dislike the Dark Elves as a race at the moment. Whereas I think they're actually a pretty good race by all accounts. Anyway, Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.